Brilliant. A really warm welcome to all of you today to this WISE webinar about intersectionality in gender balance. As you know, these WISE webinars are available as one of the many member benefits for members of core level and above, and any of your employees who are members of WISE organisation can join these, and we also record these and share the information afterwards as well for you. So what is intersectionality? It's quite a mouthful. And why do you think it's important for gender balance in STEM? Well, today we've got a fantastic range of speakers to talk about just that. We've got Leslie from Equate Scotland, who's done some research into intersectionality for women in STEM, and we'll talk through the results that they found. And then we've got a great lineup of speakers from WISE member organisations, all of whom are looking at their approach to gender balance through an intersectional lens and can really share how that's helped drive their journey. So wherever you are on your journey, there'll be something you can take away from this. Just a couple of housekeeping rules. I know we're all very au fait with Zoom these days, but please, all of you will be muted, and please keep your cameras off during the webinar. We want this to be really interactive. Like I said, this is all about sharing practical and positive tips between organisations and individuals. So please put any comments or questions into the chat box at the bottom of the screen, and we'll try and bring as many of those in during the webinar as we can. And then really importantly, we'll have a survey link at the end of the event. Please do send that survey and let us know what you think, and really importantly, what else you'd like to see from us in the future. And your answers will really help shape what happens next. So here's the agenda. As I said, we've got a fantastic panel of organisations from Network Rail, GSK, Thames Water and Rolls-Royce to talk through some of their experiences. And then we really get into some of those Q&As for all of you and those comments from you as well. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce, I'm really thrilled to introduce our first speaker, who's Leslie from Equate Scotland.
Well, good morning, and thank you so much for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. And in my first slide, I really pose the question around intersectionality as to whether it's a buzzword or actually a potential breakthrough. The term intersectionality, of course, was first really coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989, where it really is a framework for understanding how social identities such as gender, race, ethnicity, social class, religion, and sexual orientation and gender identity all overlap and interact to reinforce and very often magnify existing inequalities. So for example, we talk about inequality in terms of pay for women, but if you overlay that with pay for women who are Black or who are disabled, then we see there are wider inequalities and disadvantages that are there. Slide 2 will basically gives a little bit of context to our study. Equate Scotland decided to explore women's experiences in STEM through this lens of intersectionality. And you will probably find that more generally, intersectionality of data is not terribly well adopted at this time. And as I go through the presentation today, it will prompt, I think, some questions and challenges for how we in our organisations and our interactions need to think differently about how we use data and how we perhaps are not using data. But what I'd like to share with you today is what 400 women in STEM told us when we surveyed them last year. The first principle in slide 3 that I want to set out is that women are not a homogeneous group. So women tend to be labelled into one category. And as we go through this presentation and through this lens of intersectionality, we can see that that is not the case. What we can see is that it very often exposes overlapping inequalities. And I think as we've looked through the lens of COVID-19, and particularly around areas such as health inequalities, or who have been more heavily impacted, for example, within certain professions, then you can see that it is significantly often women, and it's also ethnic communities as well. So having that intersectionality view gives us a very different lens around which we can view any given situation. Our third principle was really just to look at those inequalities for STEM women in Scotland through that lens, to look at the inequalities being faced by women of colour, of age, LGBT, disabled women, and women in particular with caring responsibilities. If we look at slide 4, then I've done a snapshot here for you, which is what STEM women in Scotland told us. So 60% of those women experienced sexism in the workplace or in education. 34% also experienced microaggressions. 15% discriminated due to maternity, and 15% due to caring responsibilities. 1 in 3 of all respondents were not confident to report these types of issues. But when we looked at it through the lens of BAME, disabled, and LGBT, that went up to 50% who would not be confident to report. 64% indicated there was not enough being done to create inclusive workplaces or education institutes. And 72% of BAME women experienced racism or race prejudice in the workplace. If we look at slide 5, I've taken a snapshot of some of the quotes that directly came from the women that we met with. So the survey was also focused into 2 focus groups. So we had interaction and contact and could hear firsthand the direct experiences of these women. And having worked in industry for a long time and had various careers, I guess I'm pretty shocked as a woman that these types of phrases are still being used today. So to say that you won't get a pay rise because the money is needed to keep the men who are threatening to leave kind of jarred with me absolutely from the first instance. But you can see also some of the comments and the assumptions that are made about people of colour and whether they're disabled. The quote around the disabled person I thought was particularly telling, in that she was given reasonable adjustments, but then was sexually harassed. She changed how she dressed and decided not to raise that issue because she felt it had been such a fight, such a problem, just asking for disability adjustments, that she felt she couldn't then report the sexual harassment. So basically, she chose one battle to fight. And the final quote is obviously just looking at the challenges that women returning from maternity leave still face in terms of sustaining career and progression through career. If I move on to slide 6, it summarises really what we have asked for out of that study. We believe there needs to be investment in better data collection across the whole of the labour market. Key and pivotal to all of the discussions that we had was about affordable childcare, and I'm sure that that will resonate as an issue that many of you hear and experience in your own working lives. We also need to use intersectionality data to make better use and informed policy and legislation decisions. So whether that's policy in the workplace or legislation at its widest level in terms of equality, we need to look through the right lens in order to ensure that we are making the best policy decisions that we can. We also asked for increased flexible working, which bizarrely through this COVID period we've seen. However, it's also not necessarily been quite as freeing as perhaps many envisaged, because as we've seen through other statistics, the majority of responsibility for care and childcare and home education has in the main followed the path that women have picked that back up. So having the flexibility to work at home is one thing, but having not being able to let go some of those other challenges and duties is quite the other. It's also about the quality of part-time work. And as we've seen through some of the statistics that are starting to emerge about where the labour market issues are evolving, Again, it is increasingly women that are being impacted because they're already in traditionally lower paid and more seasonal and fluctuating types of part-time work. I think what we've seen and reflected in the quotes that I shared with you is that there still really needs to be a very radical change in workplace culture, investing in models of attitudinal change. There also has to be increased transparency in recruitment and promotion processes. And again, some of the insights that you got from the quotes perhaps just suggest how far we still have to come on that journey. I think we also, at a local level, at an employment level, at a company level, need to build confidence and efficacy in grievance reporting within organisations. And if anyone has ever been in a situation where they've had to deal with a grievance or even raise a grievance, it's an extremely stressful situation, and clearly having the right support to help you do that in the right way is a key part of that. One of the things we also recognised is that STEM also has to be accessible in terms of enabling women with caring responsibilities, disabled women, and also women from low income backgrounds to have the awareness of the responsibilities and the roles that could be there for them and the opportunities. And we believe that therefore the outreach aspect is a very key aspect of growing women in STEM. My final slide really just comes back to my starting point. So is this just a buzzword, or can we actually get a breakthrough? And why does intersectionality matter? Well, it matters because if we don't start to look at this world through a different lens, we will just continue to make policy and legislation through a very distorted lens. For those of you that may have read Invisible Woman by Caroline Criado Perez, you'll recognise right away where some of those very obvious issues currently reside. But if we just continue to accept those, and we consider how the world of work is evolving through climate change, the green jobs, the green agenda, the development of AI, then we will simply continue to self-perpetuate all these existing norms and values and behaviours. And therefore, women and other wider groups will not, in fact, get the social justice and the opportunities that they really should in terms of how we continue to operate the current practices that we have. The expected growth and use of AI does pose a very real threat to that continual marginalisation of wide sections of our society, and particularly women. We also need to understand the problem that we're really trying to fix, and we need to tackle it at root cause level. So many of the interventions that we make in terms of addressing women in STEM, if we look at probably the effort and time and money that's been invested in STEM activities, across the UK, then you do have to question what that return on investment has been in terms of effectively turning the dial, when we know actually that the root cause and some of the issues really does start within the home and the culture and the environment that we operate. And if we're not addressing some of those by having more interventions at early stages, then our leaky pipeline, as we refer to it, will just simply continue to leak. It also means that going forward that we continue basically to lock women out of where the well-paid jobs of the future are. STEM is going to be such an integral part of how our world moves forward, and we can see that within the green jobs, the green energy, the way technology is moving, and the way the whole AI and computer science debate is evolving. And if women are not in there and shaping at that table, then unfortunately we will continue to see ourselves not locked out just of how decisions are made, but actually how well-paid jobs and careers are evolved and developed. We also will then just marginalise whole sections of our community and wider society. And at that social justice level, that cannot be good for any of us. And it certainly cannot be the legacy that we, as women who are advocates for STEM, will want to leave. So I would also just reference a recent report that has been published through the Alan Turing Institute, which is looking at women in science and AI. And if you've not yet had the chance to look at that, it does make for some interesting reading. I'll leave it there, and happy to hand back over to yourselves now. Thank you.
That's fantastic, Leslie. Thank you so much for that. And raises some really good questions, like you say, about data and also about the approach overall. And we'll put a link to your report and also to the one you mentioned as well in the follow-up notes to this session. So thank you very much. Now, let me just bring up on camera our fantastic panel. There we go, fantastic. So we've got, just as we said there, if you can all give a bit of a wave, we've got Deb Westfield there from GSK, Frida Plaza from Rolls-Royce, we've got Sarah Gochevska from Thames Water, and Lorraine Martins from Network Rail. And it's an absolute pleasure to have all of you with us today. Thank you very much. So Deb, I think I'll come to you first.
Yes.
If everyone else just turn their cameras off, just so we can get everyone on screen at once, that'd be brilliant. You've got your camera on, Deb. Let me just see if everyone can see you.
Can you see me now, Ruth?
Yes, fantastic. Lovely to see you, Deb.
Perfect.
So you're from GSK, and it's great to have you on here. And I know that at GSK, you're really looking at career development in this way, aren't you? So I just wonder if you could share a little bit about that with us.
Yes, definitely. And I think actually before I start talking about career development, I think it's very important to understand that there are certain things out there that have helped us from thinking about representation from a gender perspective. Our former chairman, for example, Sir Philip Hampton, he was really key and instrumental in inputting and creating the Hampton-Alexander Review, which talked about female representation, especially at board level. And I think by having that champion at the top of the house, it then helps to drive some behaviours and some activities within the organisation, so that this is a real focus for the organisation moving forward. And as a result of that, it then cascades down. So our corporate executive team are really focused on gender representation, and then throughout the organisation as well. But what that has helped drive are some key initiatives within GSK. So we have our Accelerating Difference programme that is really key at spotting female talent within the organisation and then giving them sponsorship and the tools in order to enable them to develop their careers and progress their careers within GSK. We also then started looking at diverse men as well, and having that intersectional approach, because we understand that that is a challenge, to see whether or not we can enable diverse individuals within GSK to pull through into our management roles as well. And then we also try to do things in a holistic manner, whereby we look at our early talent. So what are the pipelines that are coming into GSK, and how can we put more of a focus on trying to see and embed what we want to bring into the organisation. So we then have apprentice programmes. We also have industrial placement programmes and future leaders, which is our graduate programmes. And we have monitored for a number of years what they look like. So from the application stage all the way through to hire. So who are we attracting? Who are we hiring? And then we do that for our direct hire routes as well, to ensure that from a gender, ethnicity and disability perspective, we are sourcing broadly and we are enabling ourselves to bring diversity into the organisation through those mechanisms.
And that's fantastic. They're really brilliant. And what do you think have been the things that have really enabled that to work? So I know you talked a bit about having data, a bit about having leadership as well. What do you think are the key things that other people can learn from how the success that you've had?
Definitely. And I would say that for us, I think having the champions, the advocates, in order to have a clear position on what we want to do as an organisation. So by having our chairman, who was really focused on gender representation in leadership, having our CEO, who also was aligned with the board and wanting to make this happen, and then creating a clear statement externally where we are being really visible about sharing where we are and where we need to be or where we want to be. I think that has helped us to really come together as an organisation and commit to wanting to make a difference on this agenda. So I think all of those things have helped us in order to focus, because there's a good phrase out there which says, what gets measured gets done. And in theory, that's what it's helped us to do. It helped us all to align, to really focus on what do we want to do, and then to put mechanisms in place in order to be able to do that.
Fantastic. Oh, that's really helpful, Deb. Thank you so much for that. And for everyone watching, if you have any questions or comments on this, if anything comes to mind, then please do pop them in the chat and we'll come to those in a bit. Thanks again, Deb. So it'd be great to come to you next. If you could just introduce yourself to start with on camera, that'd be fantastic. Frida, I know you're with us.
Yeah. Sorry, hi, Ruth. I was looking at the agenda, that's why.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Frida Nzaba. I'm a manufacturing engineer at Rolls-Royce and also part of the WISE Young Professional Board. So yeah, thank you for having me, Ruth. So I wanted to make an introduction. So yeah, the slides are up. So I am a Black female engineer. So from experience, I get a lot of people asking me, how does it feel to be a female in engineering? Get so many questions on that. And then I also get some questions on how does it feel to be Black in Rolls-Royce? So it's like they're two independent questions. And then I always think, why don't people say, how does it feel to be a Black female in Rolls-Royce? Because these two things are not independent. They're still myself. I'm Black and I'm still a female. So just to talk about Black Lives Matter, what happened earlier this year, I attended the Black Lives Matter protest in Nottingham. And I thought, so what's the reason? A lot of people said, yeah, but COVID, the break. And there was a lot of debates and discussions about this at work. And I just said, I'm going to go because if this was a gender related thing, I'm an advocate for this, I would also go. So I'll go because of the race as well. And I felt like I would fail myself if I didn't go. And that weekend after going to the protest, nobody asked me anything. Nobody asked me, how was your weekend? You know, I want to hear more about it. And I was ready to give them the answer. Nobody asked. So I felt like I would hold back. But then I thought to myself, I need to email the seniors. So I emailed my leadership team. I work in engine overhaul services in Derby. So I emailed them and challenged, what are they doing about the Black Lives Matter? Because outside work, you're listening to the news, you're seeing what's happening, and then you come to work and everything is perfect, essentially. So what are they doing? And I got some positive response. So they replied back and said, Frida, we've ordered 3 black flags after our CEO brought out a statement to say we stand together. So these 3 flags, as you can see in front of our facilities, they raised them up. And this sparked a lot of conversations with people because everyone was like, I think those flags were blue, weren't they? But now they're black. What does that mean? And also with the CEO statement, they went hand in hand together and people started talking about the Black Lives Matter movement a bit more. So I also decided to post this on LinkedIn and it went super viral to the point that our North America site were very interested and I thought, where do we order these flags? We want to also have that sort of awareness. So our leadership team again decided to buy the flags for North America and ship them over, which I thought was a fantastic idea again, because it's conversation starters. With such a critical topic, a lot of people at work did not want to talk about it, but it opened that conversation. And if we switch on to the next slide, please. Yep. So to add on to this, we didn't stop the conversations. We didn't just raise the flags, tick a box, move on. Our leadership team decided to go the extra step. Right. What do? We ordered black t-shirts, as you can see in the slides, where most of the people who are on shift that day got a t-shirt, and we took pictures outside, had conversations about it. And again, this just shows that the conversations were not stopping. And I've still got that t-shirt, so I still wear it to work. And a lot of people do still, as part of their uniform, because again, it sparks that conversation. Even if you went to a different facility, they'll think, where did you get that black shirt from? It's not navy blue, but it still says Rolls-Royce. So again, you're creating that conversation. And if we go to the next slide. So I'm a part of the African Caribbean Pioneers Network. So this is an employee resource groups in Rolls-Royce. So we decided to create a handbook, as you can see there, and distribute it to all our members and anybody else that was interested. Because we had these conversations, people emailing us, but all lives matter, etc., etc. So we decided to have this resource which provided resources on how people can help, because people thought, how do I help with this? This is happening, what do I do? So we decided to distribute films that they can watch for awareness, articles, books, again, for knowledge building, and also petitions that were happening around that time that they can also sign up to and help in that way. And then if we move to the next slide. Thank you. To take it the next step, we decided to have a team meeting. I encouraged the leadership team. I would distribute these books via email, and also encourage each team within EOS where I work to have that team meeting and those discussions. And my manager allowed me to lead that session particularly, and I opened up and talked about the different microaggressions that I've received as a Black woman in general, at work and outside work. I talked about the different things where somebody would reach over and touch my hair unexpectedly, and we're not very close. So again, that's something I wouldn't do, but it's the little things, you know, and the little comments. And a lot of people were shocked and they were surprised and thought, oh, Frida, I didn't mean that. But I thought, you didn't mean it. But again, if you didn't know somebody, they might have thought of it differently. So again, it's more educating the teams around us. And that was, again, it went fantastic. And we had a lot of debates going back and forth. And that's just a few things that Rolls-Royce have done. And these conversations are still being sparked up, as we had our conference last week with the ACPN. And again, that was amazing, because my general manager actually came up to me and said, Frida, I'm going to attend this. Whereas usually I would feel nervous asking people about it in case they say, well, I'm not Black, I can't attend an African Caribbean Pioneers Network. But you know, the fact that I've got advocates in the company, it was just an amazing feeling to keep the conversations going.
That's brilliant. Oh, Frida, thank you so much. There's a real range of really practical things that you've done. And those flags were, what a bold statement. That was brilliant. So thank you very much, Frida. We'll definitely, I'm sure there'll be questions in the chat as well at the end. So thank you.
Thank you.
We'll now move on to Sarah. So lovely to see you, Sarah. If you could just introduce yourself and let us know where you're from.
Yep, absolutely. Hi, I'm Sarah Gaszewska. I work for Thames Water, leading on culture, diversity and inclusion and employee engagement. And today I want to share with you just some of the things that we're doing to embrace, nurture and support females and the multiple identities that we each have, using a holistic and intersectional view of diversity and inclusion. And that's to ensure that people feel truly able to bring their whole selves to work, to be able to perform at their very best, so that our customers, communities and the environment can thrive. Firstly, though, what I'd like to do is introduce you to some of our women in science and engineering. And the next two slides should play automatically if you click on. So the great thing about diversity is that we are all different, we are all unique, and we each bring different skills, qualities, experiences to the table. But in order to ensure that we do attract, develop and retain the very best talent, we've got to create that environment that enables people in all of their intersectional glory to bring the whole selves to work. We are in an unprecedented time, and there may well be barriers and self-limiting beliefs before and currently too for women in science and engineering. But if there can be a silver lining, we do have a golden opportunity because of COVID and because of adaptations that we're needing to make to reconsider inclusion in its widest sense and ensure that everyone has equality of opportunity. and that we create those conditions so that women of different ages, ethnicities, sexual orientations, those with faith, those with disabilities, long-term health conditions, everybody can flourish at work. And women in science and engineering may be carers, they may take time out of their careers to have a family. And in many cases, that might mean that the mother is taking the majority of the leave, because certainly from a statutory perspective, that is better financially. But what I'd ask you to do is to think about, what about same-sex couples? What about shared parental leave? And what's your family policies like? Do you offer enhanced pay? Is this aligned for adoption, fostering, shared parental leave? One of the things that we've done is introduced enhanced, aligned maternity, adoption and shared parental leave, and that's to help to create that level playing field in the first place. Whereas some mothers will of course want to take the full entitlement, and they've got to take the first 2 weeks anyway. If they have a partner, be that of the same sex or a different sex, this can then help to minimise the financial and potentially therefore gender biased decision making that comes into it. If we can just move on to the next slide. Thank you. So the other thing I'd encourage you to think about is toilets and facilities in labs or on sites or offices in what may have historically been a male-dominated environment. And if we think about things purely from a female perspective, things like ensuring that we've got adequate facilities, toilets, changing rooms, etc., for people on those sites, are we missing out? Are we not perhaps considering that wider intersectionality piece? Now, 83% of people who are disabled become disabled during their working lives. And at Thames Water, we're really proud to be the first water company to become disability confident leaders. We really understand the value of recruiting, but also crucially retaining people with disabilities and long-term health conditions, making reasonable adjustments to ensure that people can truly flourish in their careers. If we think about facilities in the widest sense, and what we talked about with adequate female toilets and changing rooms, if the only way to access those is up steps with no ramps, no drop curbs, or upstairs without a lift, or even along a corridor that's not wide enough for a wheelchair, or once you're in the toilet, if you've done all of that great stuff, but the sink is too high for you to reach, if you imagine you were in a wheelchair, then we have not adequately ensured that we can attract and retain females with disabilities, as an example. And that means that we might not attract people in the first place to imagine that they're going near a site or headquarters, and they're seeing steps with no drop curbs, no lifts. It might mean that we're missing out on talent in the first place because they're not even thinking that that's somewhere that they can see themselves, that that's somewhere that they can be. Or imagine that would mean that we lose our highly talented women in science and engineering because we haven't ensured that we've got the environment that enables people to truly flourish. And as part of our future ways of working programme, we're looking at potential collaboration hubs. How do we ensure that we consider intersectionality in its widest sense to make sure that it's welcoming for women? And taking into account Leslie's point, we're not a homogeneous group. We may well be women in science and engineering who are also carers, have disabilities, long-term health conditions, maybe older, maybe younger, maybe have a religion or belief or none, as an example. Our characteristics and who we are don't define which of our employees will or won't be carers. And indeed, caring responsibilities can happen quite literally overnight. Perhaps there's an accident that happens, and that might result in a temporary or permanent disability of your employees. They might have a need to shield. They might be living with someone that needs to shield and at a heightened risk of COVID. So I'd also consider encourage people to consider risk assessments. What about PPE? Is that female-friendly PPE? What about people who maybe rely on lip reading? We are currently using auto-transcribe apps, not just for female employees, but also for customers too, for those who rely on lip reading. And then think about employee networks and networking, which we find so useful for developing and supporting women in science and engineering with social distancing in mind. So do we use things like Zoom or Microsoft Teams, which is what we use, to get together informally, like our carers network and our women's network do. We held one recently on dementia awareness and sign language, as well as some career development sessions. But if you're doing breakfast meetings or lunch and learns, thinking about being mindful of when that's taking place. If it's Ramadan, for example, if people have got cameras on and they may be eating in the canteen or eating breakfast, eating lunch, think about how that might make those females feel who may be Muslim, who may be fasting, and what education you have in place. So we do quite a lot of communications and education around ensuring that we have those safe spaces to be able to learn, raise awareness and support one another. And just the final thing that I wanted to share with you is the inclusion cards that we actually launched a couple of years ago. And they quite literally are a deck of cards designed completely by our diversity and inclusion champions with fictitious scenarios. And the idea is that you pick a different scenario. You consider if that scenario were to happen, how might that make people feel? How might our female women in engineering and science feel? How might our customers feel too? And then what can each of us individually and collectively do to ensure that we're a diverse and inclusive, great place to work, where people feel supported and truly able to bring their whole selves to work to perform at their very best. So if we can go on to the final slide, that was just a couple of food for thought and things that we have been doing at Thames Water. I hope you found that useful.
Sarah, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. And it just feels like I said earlier, every bit of that we could go into for another hour. One thing I was just interested in is those inclusion cards. Could you give us one example of one scenario that you used there, or one thing that was written on one of those cards?
Yeah, so one of them, for example, might be that a manager in your team comes to you and they've got an employee that's a high potential female in women in science and engineering, but they are concerned about going for a promotion because maybe they want to have a family or they're thinking of getting married or something like that. If that were to happen, how might you feel? And, you know, we get people, men as well, because it's really important to engage men in this conversation, to be champions of women too, saying that would be awful. You know, if that was even a thought going through someone's head, that's awful. But it also puts it in the third person and starts getting people thinking, do you know, that could well be what people are thinking about or worried about. And therefore we might be missing out on people, attracting people, but also developing and helping people to truly flourish. So then it opens up those conversations to say, well, how can we have that open environment, chat to people, and what can we do to ensure people don't feel like that and they do, you know, go for those opportunities.
Yeah, oh, that's brilliant, Sarah. And like you say, starting those conversations, it's really key, isn't it? Thank you so much. That was fantastic. Thank you. Now, Lorraine, if I can come to you. There we go. Brilliant. So I know, Lorraine, there's some brilliant work you're doing at Network Rail. One thing I was quite interested in is, with all of these different backgrounds, communities, with all your employees, how do you work at Network Rail? I know at Network Rail you've got different employee networks, haven't you? So just be interested in hearing a bit about how they work together and how you approach that.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Wonderful. And thank you, Ruth, for inviting me to join the panel. And the panelists have been absolutely brilliant. So I'm sitting here in awe, really, bringing up the rear, absolutely, and hopefully reinforcing many of the things that have been said. And I particularly appreciated Leslie's presentation, and I'm hoping that those slides will be made available to us all. So in Network Rail, we've always taken an intersectionality approach. So our first strategy was called Everyone, because we wanted to posit that thought in a male-dominated organisation that diversity and inclusion wasn't about others. So we've always done that. And we've used the data to help look at the impact of our approaches on different communities. So that's been riven in our strategy. The employee network groups that we have been really fundamental in enabling us to do that, and particularly over the time of COVID and in the aftermath of the death of George Floyd. So we have 6 employee networks. We have Inspire, which is gender equality, Can Do, which is our disabled employees network, Cultural Fusion, which is our Black, Asian and minority ethnic network, Myriad, which is our carers network, Multi-Faith network, and I've missed one out, I think, but anyway, this is it, she said. So if my counting's not that good. And what we've noticed of late, and particularly, as I said, in the context of COVID, and because people are working remotely, is the use of technology has enabled two things really. One, a wider reach across the organisation, because we're all remote, but actually we're using the technology so the physicality is removed, but we can get together much quicker and much wider. But we've also understood some of the commonalities that people from those different networks face and wanted to share. So an example would be that during Ramadan, we had an iftar session which everybody was invited to, and so they had more people attending that, which is the breaking of the fast for our Muslim colleagues. And that was a really powerful event that opened up the eyes and experience really of different people of faith or no faith who took the opportunity to participate. During Pride, we had a virtual Pride event, which was attended by over 500 people. Wow. And also with different organisations. And again, a real opportunity for people who had traditionally not necessarily felt that they wanted to be involved, they had access to it. Our Cultural Fusion Network has held coffee mornings, as has Archway, that's the network I didn't mention, which is our LGBT plus network. Each of them hold coffee sessions once a week where people come and either do a learning event or share some issues. And as a consequence of the death of George Floyd, particularly for Cultural Fusion, that was incredibly valuable in terms of opening up some of the conversation about what it's like to be Black in Network Rail and what we could do better, more of, to be supportive and to create an inclusive environment. So all of the networks have been absolutely fantastic about making that alliance with each other, and that's on the rise. I think there's a fundamental process that we have that has helped to heighten that, and it's called the diversity impact assessment process. And I know that Sarah mentioned talking about risk assessments. In all of our risk assessment work and our diversity work in terms of people returning back into the workplace, we've required each of our employee networks to inform those decisions and to inform those policies so that they are as inclusive as possible. So we've got a process that kind of forces that to happen, but we're also seeing that happening primarily because people are, I guess, more sensitized now to the fact that we all hold multiple identities. I'll draw a pause there because I know we need some time to have some wider conversations, but hopefully that's a kind of sample of how we've adopted and benefited from the intersectionality of our employees.
No, that's fantastic, Lorraine. Thank you so much. And like you say, we could chat all day, couldn't we? I feel like it's brilliant. So I'll bring the rest of the panel up as well. We've had a few questions come in, and if any other questions people are watching do have, please put them in the comments. The first question we had, which Lorraine, I'll probably come to you first, and then if anyone else wants to join in, is about how we get senior leadership buy-in. So somebody said that there's been mention of sponsorship from some of the speakers, and I know a lot of the examples we've had today have really mentioned senior leadership. How do organisations watching, what can we say to help them get that buy-in and really secure it longer term?
So some of the things that we've done at Network Rail is particularly around the employee networks. We've asked members of our executive leadership team to be a sponsor. So each of them has an executive sponsor, which acts as the executive sponsor acts as a kind of critical friend, but also gives permission for others to participate in those networks. We've also got our leaders a suite of diversity and inclusion objectives that they can include as part of their own performance. So it's not something that remains out there. And we've also done a fair bit of work around encouraging leaders to begin to articulate why diversity and inclusion is important to them.
Yeah.
So, and kind of owning diversity and inclusion in the same way that we own the responsibility for financial performance, or we own the responsibility for safety performance, or all of those things. We're really trying to get better at different leaders talking about why diversity and inclusion is important for them as individuals and for us as a business. I wouldn't say that we're there yet, but I think those things are really important foundations to supporting a better and more wider ownership of diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Sarah, yes, do jump in if you unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. So I think for me as well, obviously echo everything that Lorraine has just said. In terms of buy-in, I find talking about the business benefits, so 35% ethnically diverse organisations, 35% better performers, gender diverse organisations, at least 21% better performers, and EBITDA, so money talks. And when you're thinking in terms of the commercials behind it, the cost of not having the very best people working for you, or the cost of losing the very best talent, I find that really grabs people's attentions. And then, as Lorraine says, then ensuring that we're going through, well, here's the benefits, how can we, reverse mentoring too really opens their eyes to see, I never thought of it that way. And a lot of our senior leaders have said how much reverse mentoring has helped them better think about their decisions and make more rounder, enhanced decisions. And why wouldn't you want to have the very best talent working for your business to ensure that you really thrive?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, no, reverse mentoring. I know a lot of organisations have found that, definitely. So thank you. Just jumping back, another question we've had is, that's about senior leaders. What about every single employee in an organisation? What do we think there are a couple of things that everyone can do on a day-to-day basis, whether in work or in their personal lives, to really help that feeling of true inclusion and belonging? So I just wonder if anyone wants to sort of say something on that. From the experiences you've had, what can each employee do who isn't a senior leader in their everyday working life?
Hi, I'd like to take that if that's okay. Can you hear me? It's Deb.
Yes, perfectly. Thanks, Deb.
Hi, I would say from our perspective, do not underestimate your employee resource groups. For us, if I take the example of race and ethnicity, we had our Embrace Employee Resource Group that was established in 2017. By 2018, Embrace was instrumental in actually starting the discussion about race and ethnicity. And this was throwing this out more broadly, globally, to GSK as an organisation. So this is senior leaders and employees to actually start the narrative and the dialogue about the challenge when it comes to race and ethnicity in the workplace. And they were really good at bringing in external speakers into GSK to really promote that understanding at all levels within the organisation. And actually from there, they have been continuing, as have our Women's Leadership Initiative within GSK, really educating allies and everybody within the organisation, whether it's senior leadership or in their normal day job, so the everyday person, in understanding how they can make a difference from a cultural perspective within the organisation, and actually even creating things like toolkits, running education sessions to really kind of move that agenda forward so that everyone can understand how they can play a part in being the change.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Deb. Frida, did you want to mention something?
Yes, I did. I think from my experience, it would be having an advocate. For example, for us on the shop floor, it's the hardest population to get hold of in terms of D&I, diversity and inclusion, because for them, they don't see their emails, they don't see these posters that we're sending out. So I think it's having somebody within the group that you're trying to influence to be able to influence them. And one of those are middle managers. So it's good to have the senior leadership team supporting and sponsoring your initiatives as the employee resource group. However, you need a manager, you need for example, a production leader, you need somebody that's close to the people you're trying to influence to be able to send out these initiatives, put them up on posters on the boards, put them up in, the dinner area. So that's how people, by them knowing what these things are, they won't be scared of it, or they won't think the opposite of it, for example. It's just having that awareness.
Brilliant. No, that's great. Thanks very much, Frida. We've got another question, which is a bit more broad. We know that roughly women in STEM, it's around 24%, of the workforce at the moment. Question is, if that balance were reversed, so if it was 75% women and 25% men, for example, do you think we'd still be looking at it the same way and aiming for gender balance in any organisation? So that's quite an interesting, slightly different sort of question. I don't know if anyone's got any thoughts on that at all. Yeah, Sarah?
Wouldn't it be amazing if we had an environment in our world which was inclusive, not just within our own organisations, but within society too? I think for me, it's always about intersectionality and it's always about inclusion in its widest sense. And I think there's always things that we can do to ensure that we're continuously attracting, retaining the very best people. But even when people move on, how are we ensuring that people are advocates and we're generating the pipeline for the future? So for me, absolutely brilliant if we are able to remove barriers, self-limiting beliefs, and to help create that environment. But there will always be a focus for me on intersectionality and inclusion.
Perfect. Now that's brilliant, Sarah. Thank you very much, Sarah. Fantastic. Any other questions we've got in the chat at all? Have a look. Great. And the one other question that came in was really around data. So I know, Leslie, you touched on this in your presentation about the importance of capturing data, of looking at the data and the details so we can track our results. And I think, Deb, you mentioned as well, what gets measured gets done, if you like. Just any thoughts from anyone on either any issues that organisations have with tracking different data for different, for different communities, or anything that's really worked well that you've found in terms of tracking that and why you'd support that? Yes, Deb.
Hi.
And then Lorraine.
So we've been collecting data, I would say, within GSK UK for since 2015. And we've been looking at both gender, ethnicity and disability. What I would say is, yes, it is important to track that data, but if you're in a position where you do not have the data or you cannot get it initially, I would say don't let that stop you. Generally, if you're focusing on leadership, you can use purely optics and you can see who is in the room, and then you have a challenge. So that's the first point that I would say about data. When you then do collect data, I think it is really important that you are looking at the right things so that you can gain insights from that data that then feed strategy moving forward so that you can really make robust decisions. And the third thing I would say is don't look at your data in isolation. I think within GSK, we have been really good at collecting the data, looking at the data, analysing the data and understanding where our challenges are. However, I would say when you think about this from an intersectional perspective, a lot of the data is generally collected in silo. And what I mean by that is generally in the past, we have all been collecting gender data alone, or we've been collecting disability data alone, or we have been collecting other data in silo. We haven't really looked closely enough at the data from an intersectional approach. And what I would say is, from us and a GSK perspective, what that has meant is that we have really done well on the gender perspective of bringing more women into roles at GSK and into leadership, but perhaps we may have missed bringing intersectional women into leadership roles. So we've just hired lots of white women, perhaps, rather than lots of women that are broadly diverse. And so I would say there's always a caveat when you look at data, how you collect it and how you use it, but don't let data be the limitation that stops you doing anything and making any progress.
That's really powerful. Thanks, Deb. Lorraine, I think you wanted to add something there as well.
Thanks, Deb, for that. You introduced a new phrase to me, which is intersectional woman. I thought we all are intersectional. I think the thing that I would add to what Deb said really is that you align your data to some of the anecdotal stuff that's happening as well to kind of triangulate it. So if your data isn't good enough, but you are picking up information which is about people's lived experience, it's not to be ignored. And making sure you triangulate them, I think, is really important in terms of driving what you do. And we're using that data in our pay gap reporting. So we published our ethnicity pay gap. And the next one will have a really good section on intersectionality, which is great for us because it means that we're focusing much deeper on the things that will make a difference. So data is part of the story, but don't lose the kind of richness of the kind of qualitative stories that kind of impact on people's lives.
No, that makes a lot of sense, Lorraine. Thank you so much. Like I said, we could quite happily stay and have lunch and chat all day, but we have to wrap up now. What I want to say to everyone watching, thank you so much for being involved and being a part of this, and a huge thank you to all of our panelists and speakers today. Every single story you had has really, I think, helped people watching and has really helped us working together as a community to drive gender balance forward in STEM. The next event we've got, I think, is in December, looking at flexible working and how it affects cultures of organisations. We know it's something that's coming across a lot, so keep an eye out for that. Like we said, you'll also get an email following this with the recording and with a survey for any of your feedback that you've got. So please do keep telling us what you like about these webinars, what you'd like to see in the future, because by this community building it together is what really is helping all of us. Once again, a huge thank you to all of you, especially the panel and the speakers, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much and goodbye.